Have you ever missed out on a knife because of the pure volume of new knife model releases that happens every week, every month, every year? I know that I have. I have lusted after so many knives only to have them shunted to the side as the next batch of brand new knives arrive. The good ones tend to stick around. The good ones earn a spot in your brain. And today we're going to be talking about one such model that has earned a spot in my brain, and now it's earned a spot in my pocket. Let's go ahead and talk about the Boker Urban Trapper.
This is Sparta!
Hey, how's it going, everybody? If you're new here, welcome in. And if you've been here before, smash the like button on the way in. I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And today I'm excited because we finally got our hands on a knife that I've wanted to check out for years. There's been several variations of this knife over the years, and this one is by far my favorite, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk about it. This is the Boker Urban Trapper with the premium carbon fiber. It's kind of a special edition, and the previous versions of this knife were full titanium with, they had the perforated look, and it's a Brad Zinker design. Brad Zinker is one of those knife makers, one of those knife designers who has been in the background in the knife and EDC community for a while, and the man knows a thing or two about making and designing some really fantastic knives. But before we go in too deep, I do want to say thank you and a big shout out to our friends over at Boker for supplying this for review. I really want to talk about why I like this knife so much and why it was worth circling back around to talk about almost 2 years later. So the Boker Urban Trapper Premium, that's what this one is going to be a nearly full-size knife coming in at 7 3/4 inches overall. About 3.5 of that is going to be this beautifully done M390 stonewash blade, and it's kind of got a bit of a high polish going on there if you don't mind my fingerprints. High polish stonewash is one of my favorite blade finishes because it looks good and it wears in really well. The blade itself is made of M390, and this features a hollow ground blade that comes down to a very thin and slicey edge. And if you want to see me go through some cardboard, make sure you stick around. The handle scales are going to be titanium scales with a carbon fiber overlay. The scales themselves are nicely contoured, and I love to see that, and it features an open back design. Going back here to the clip side, you'll see that we have a blind screwed 3D milled titanium pocket clip, which I think fits the design really freaking well. It is a bolster lock, which is to say that it's a frame lock with a bit of carbon fiber covering up most of the lock bar. And so you get a nice marriage between this shredded carbon fiber and this really well done blasted titanium. The hardware is going to be T8 Torx bit all the way around. Action happens via ceramic ball bearings and a ceramic detent, and it's got one deployment option and one option only. If you're a fan of front flippers, I'm going to tell you right now, it's good. I am not the biggest front flipper guy. Like, I know about the tricks, but I'm not necessarily good at all of the tricks, but most people can still do the thumb rollover. That's the most basic one. And I can tell you that that's really good. It's really satisfying, and it's tuned specifically for it. It's a beautiful thing when the only deployment option has perfect tuning, because when it's one and done, what makes it a fidgety knife, what makes it enjoyable to carry, is the fact that it's very well made, and the fact that it's fidgety is just a product of it being very well made. Even if you are deplorable like me and you like to fidget with your knives incessantly and anger those in the near vicinity. But aside from its fidgety nature being a front flipper, there's some design aspects that I'm a huge fan of, and I want to go more into depth on this. Now, a knife's primary purpose is to be a cutting tool. And if it's not a good cutter, then it's just a glorified fidget spinner, right? Right. Glad that we can agree. Now, in this case, some features that I really love are going to be the hollow ground blade and that blade finish. You could definitely classify this as a gentleman's folder or a gentleman's knife. It's kind of like a CEO front flipper. And it shows, especially when you start looking at the spine of the blade. Check that out. It's actually a crown spine that is deleted by this swedge up here at the top, which is not only for looks, but also functionality. It's going to provide some excellent cutting relief when you're moving through materials. One of the things about hollow ground blades is they get really thin behind the edge, and then they kind of dip out and get thicker. And that means that depending upon how the rest of the blade is ground, you can actually bind up while going through material like cardboard. So having a swedge there is great because it offers some extra cutting relief on the back end of your knife. The next thing that I love about this knife is going to be the bolster lock. Bolster locks are basically just better frame locks. I said it, guys. Bolster locks are better than frame locks, primarily because on a frame lock knife, especially on a frame lock knife that has slender handle scales, it becomes entirely too easy to put too much pressure on that lock bar. I hate that. Have you ever done that where you go to deploy your knife and you're like, oh, fail? And it happened because your meaty sausage fingers were resting on the lock bar. If it's a well-tuned detent, it should in fact mean that any extra pressure reduces your ability to deploy the knife. That's what happens with a well-tuned detent. So the beauty of a bolster lock is that you have something overlaying part of that lock bar, which means that you don't have to worry about putting too much pressure on it, but also it's going to help with wear and tear over time. Frame lock knives are amazing. They're also known as the Chris Reeve integral lock, but the problem is that when you hold it in your hand while your hand is making sure that the frame lock stays engaged over time, what will happen is that lock bar will move over and over and over, especially when you carry it and fidget with it all the time. So the beauty of a bolster lock is that you have this piece of carbon fiber right here, which is going to keep your sausage fingers from inadvertently placing too much wear on that lock bar, and that's great. The action, as you can see, is nice and smooth. It's not a heavy blade, so it doesn't drop shut after you release the lock bar, but it will drop shut onto your thumb. This pocket clip here is fantastic, and we're starting to see more companies nowadays doing this with the blind screwed pocket clip, so you don't have another piece of hardware showing on the beautiful scales. And so that means that the pocket clip is in fact screwed from the inside. Now, when it comes to pocket clips, my thing is this: it's one part aesthetics, one part ergonomics, and one part utility. Aesthetics is kind of obvious, how well does it go with the rest of the design? And some manufacturers will play it safe and just do a regular popsicle stick pocket clip, and you know what, that's totally fine because it doesn't necessarily interrupt the second part, which is ergonomics. On a milled clip, you're going to get better ergonomics overall because there's no ski jump that is interrupting the flesh, the meat of your palms. It's going to be flat from the top, which means that it's going to just disappear in the palms. A pocket clip that gives you a hot spot on your hand is going to be something that could potentially ruin a good carry for you. And so the beauty of that milled clip, it means that it's going to have good ergonomics. And then the last part is utility. How easily does it go in and out of your pocket? How much retention does it have? And usually the two are kind of at odds with each other, because if it's got amazing retention, it might not be the smoothest to go in and out of your pocket. And if it's really smooth going in and out of your pocket, it might not have the best retention. So balance is needed when we're talking about these things. And this is a great clip, guys. This clip is extremely stiff. It's got great retention, but it doesn't struggle going in and out of the pocket. So it's a nice balance there. Even though it's very stiff, it's not going to have any issues. It's not going to tear up your jeans, especially because it's titanium against this carbon fiber, and it's not texturized on that carbon fiber. So you're not going to have any issues there either. On the handle scales, I freaking love contoured scales. Your hand is not a flat slab, which means that when you go to hold something, it creates a bit of a contour. A contoured handle scale is going to fit in your hand and be more comfortable than a slab style scale each and every time. However, doing contoured milling is not cheap for manufacturers. It is way more time consuming, and you need different machines that can actually do that, especially if you're counting on a CNC machine to actually contour out something like titanium and carbon fiber. I do want to show you just how good of a slicer this is, because whenever you have a hollow ground blade, you can rest assured that it's going to cut very nicely. So in my hands, I've got a scrap piece of cardboard, and let's go ahead and see how the Boker Urban Trapper cuts. Just as you would expect, it slips through material. Very, very clean cuts. The factory edge on here is great, and that M390 is going to be holding that factory edge for a decent amount of time. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you go fast, if you go slow, it doesn't matter. It gets the job done really well. This is one of those knives that you could take to a dinner party, and if you need to have a really sharp steak knife and the steakhouse that you're at maybe doesn't have the sharpest of steak knives, just pull this guy out. It'll get the job done, and it'll make some nice clean cuts as well. That's great. The cutting geometry here is more than just how thin it is behind the edge. It's also how thin it is on the rest of that blade grind. But that's not to say that I love absolutely everything about this knife. Let's face it, guys, most knives are not completely perfect. There's usually one or two things that I can nitpick, and in this situation, the main thing that stands out to me is that this is not a captive pivot. This is a free spinning pivot, which means that not only is it double-sided, but if you go to take this apart, you're going to need 2 Torx bits to do that. It's not the end of the world, but it is an opportunity for improvement. It is something that I enjoy on a lot of premium knives, is having a single-sided captive pivot, so that when it comes time to take it apart, or when it comes time to tune that pivot, that you could do so with a single screw. Even if it's not a single-sided pivot, you can still make it captive, and in this case, they just didn't, which is completely fine. A lot of classic knife designs don't have single-sided captive pivots, but it is something that I would love to see on future Boker models. But now I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. Have you ever checked out the Boker Urban Trapper? Or is this a knife that fell away in the background? Let's have that conversation in the comment section down below, guys. And if you want to watch more awesome knife and EDC content, feel free to click on one of the videos that pops up next.